Hi there. So I'm going to walk through the bleed procedure for Shimano hydraulic brakes that I've come up with and that I think is especially good for winter bikers. Basically, the idea is that since Shimano brakes use mineral oil, any water that gets in, or contamination, humidity, which eventually becomes water, that gets into the system is going to work its way down. You know, oil floats on water, and so the water is going to work its way down to the caliper, and quite often the first thing to go on Shimano brakes is the brake caliper at the bottom, which is likely because water builds up and people don't bleed their brakes often enough or in the right way, and so the water is right up against the actual piston and rusts it out, which, you know, rust causes problems wherever it occurs. So the idea is going to be to flush out the water. So I'm going to push some fluid from the top down to the bottom just to get rid of that water at the beginning. And then after that, the second step is going to be to try and get all the air bubbles out of the system so that you have a nice solid brake feel. So let's get started. First thing you want to do is take the wheel out. You can't stress the importance of that enough. No matter how careful you are, there's going to be oil getting splashed around. And if you get oil on your brake pads, it's just a pain to get it off. And sometimes you have to replace them completely. So make sure that you do that. You take the wheel out, you take the disc pads out, and you put a bleed block in. I, living in Canada, have always had a hard time finding bleed blocks that are any kind of a reasonable price. I don't want to pay $10 of shipping for a little piece of plastic. And so I made a video, which is 2 seconds long, but basically just get yourself a bleed block. You can, if you can't get a bleed block, then keep your old pads, put something like a chunk of rubber in the middle of them, and then tape them together, and then that's a perfect bleed block. So I'm going to put that in. Nice fit. Okay. And you can actually squeeze on the brake lever a little bit just so that it pinches it so that it won't fall out again if it is loose. So there we go. All right. Then what you want to do is level off the brake lever. So I'm going to lift the brake lever up. So that it's completely level. Remove the top bleed screw. With a 2mm hex key in this case. Make sure you put the screw somewhere safe, because if you lose it, your bike is useless. Alright. Now, the bleed kit that I'm using comes from Mountain Equipment Co-op. It comes with 4 syringes and all the hardware that you need to bleed either Shimano hydraulic brakes or Avid hydraulic brakes. And it's $40 for 2 bleed kits, 2 entire bleed kits. The only thing it's missing, once again, is bleed blocks. So I would highly recommend that. And it comes with, Shimano often has a cup on the top, but for this particular bleed procedure, I actually like having a syringe even better. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top syringe and add a little bit of hydraulic fluid. So let's say for the flush, I'm just going to say a little more than 10. I'm going to say 12 milliliters of brake fluid. Just going to get the air bubbles out so you hold it vertically, and with a paper towel. I had a paper towel around here somewhere. I'll use this little piece. With the paper towel, just push it back up, keeping it really vertical so that all the air gets forced out the top. Once a little bit comes out the top, you can screw it into the top bleed port, and and finger tight is sufficient. So just finger tighten it up, nice and snug. Get another paper towel out. All right. Then take your empty syringe, place it on the bottom bleed nipple, push it down, make sure it's all the way down so that there's a good seal, and open this up one full turn. So counterclockwise, one full turn. If you find there's a lot of resistance, it's probably just because you need to open this up a little bit more on the bottom. All right, so fluid has already started to drain into this. So now what I'm going to do is force from the top to the bottom the entire amount. So that would be about 12 milliliters of fluid that I'm forcing into the bottom syringe. You can pull back on the bottom one as you're pushing down on the top. And we're just going to leave 1 milliliter at the top. You're never going to push the syringe all the way down because then you'll just end up injecting some of the air bubbles that were in it. So that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to close the bleed port again just to avoid any oil coming out. I'm going to discard this fluid, which is contaminated now with mineral oil, or sorry, the mineral oil from here is probably the most contaminated with water. As I was saying, the oil is going to float, so the water is going to be down in the bottom caliper. So don't dump this stuff down the drain. Of course, you have to follow the local environmental laws when you're dealing with any kind of brake fluid. I store it in a little bottle, and then every once in a while I bring it to the eco center where they recycle all kinds of oil. Then what you're going to do is load the bottom syringe. So that's basically the flush. Now I'm done the section of the bleed, which I call the flush. Once again, especially important for winter bikers because you don't want the bottom piston to rust out. So the next step then is to try and get all of the air bubbles out of the system. And so what I'm going to do is, since air rises, air bubbles rise, we're going to work with that by taking fluid, forcing it from the bottom all the way to the top. So reload your syringe with 15 milliliters of fresh brake fluid. And you also, since this is going to be the fluid that you're leaving in the system, the less gas the better. And so what I'm going to do is actually degas the fluid. So what you do is you force the bubbles to the top again. Then it doesn't have to be right to the top for this. I'm going to plug the top with my thumb and pull the syringe down. And you can see that bubbles start to form. That's all gas that was in the fluid. It takes a bit of strength. Shake it to get the bubbles out. So you can do that 2 or 3 times, depending on how patient you are. And you'll see that very quickly it gets more and more clear until there's almost no more bubbles. Which means you have a gas-free fluid, which means you should have a nice, much tighter brake feel when all is said and done. So it's looking pretty clear now. I'm going to move the fluid up the syringe, gently so it doesn't come out the top until there's no more bubbles. There we go. And you can see I have 15 milliliters of fluid there. reattach, making sure it's all the way down so we have a nice seal. Open the bleed port, one full turn. Now I'm going to start to force this fluid down. And you'll see it coming up into the top. And you can actually pull on the top plunger too, in order to get the fluid to come all the way through. So pushing on the bottom syringe down to about half the fluid, down to around 10 milliliters or so. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is to press the brake lever completely. And then as I push down on the bottom syringe to apply a lot of pressure, I'm going to let go of the top. You can feel the fluid flowing into the handle. Just slowly let it out while keeping that pressure on the bottom syringe until it's all the way out. Then we're going to push the fluid down until you have about 1 milliliter of fluid left. You don't want to go any further than that in case you introduce more air bubbles into the system. So that's about it. Then we're just going to detach the syringes. You can hand tighten it first. And then close it completely. Wipe up the oil. Give the top handle a couple of small flicks. See if any air bubbles come out. If not, good to go. So unscrew the top, mop up the oil as it comes off because quite a bit tends to spill out. Use your 2 millimeter Allen key to put the bleed screw back in. Tighten it to the specified torque, which is just tight enough. I never use a torque wrench for small things like that. Just make sure it's snug and it should be fine. Just need everything to be sealed in the end. And then you should have a pretty good lever feel. It should be nice and tight. No sponginess. If it is spongy still, then you'll need to go back and repeat that part of just the air bleed until it gets to be a nice tight lever feel. But that is all there is to it. Feels good.